Entities. Entities in LDtk are other objects in your level, such as item pickups, enemies, treasure chests, spawn points, etc. In LDtk, these entities each have their own sizes and can be rendered using custom images or plain colors in LDtk. Open the Entity screen using the E key. The plus button will create a new entity. You can also explore the options in the Presets button to create a particular shape. It will have the region tag and default shape. Entity Identifier, a unique human-readable ID for your entity. Entity Settings. Number 1. MISC Options. 1. Add to JSON table of content. When checked, we'll put all instances of this entity in a root element of the generated project JSON. This is useful for quick access to all of a specific entity type, like a player spawn, without parsing all levels individually. Be warned, putting too much in this field will bloat the JSON unnecessarily, so use it sparingly. 2. Can be out of level bounds. When enabled, will allow the entity to be outside of the level area. For example, I've used this to place a death trigger below my level when falling off a cliff. 2. Documentation, a short text description that appears when hovering over the entity in the entities list. 3. Tags. Tags are used to group your entities. This can make the entities easy to find in the entity screen, but also allows you to restrict certain layers to use specific types of entities. 4. Size. Most of these options are self-explanatory. 1. The default size of the entity. 2. The minimum size is the smallest size it can be. 3. The maximum size is the biggest size it can be. 4. Resizable. Whether we want to allow it to be resized. Which dimensions should be resizable? Width? Height? Should we maintain the aspect ratio? 5. Editor Visual. Sets the color and shape for our entity. You could use a specific tile from a tile set to represent the entity even more visually. You can change the opacity of the tile, the opacity of its fill color when not using a tile, and the opacity of the outline around it. The Hollow checkbox makes it so that the inside of the entity isn't rendered and can't be selected. If you have a fill color, it won't show, and in order to select the entity, you'll have to place your mouse closer to the outline. 6. Alt UI icon. This is the icon used in the Entities panel on the sidebar. 7. Pivot point, where the origin of the entity should be. This affects how the entity is rendered in your game engine. If you choose the top left square, selected by default, you'll have to make sure that in your game engine the object is also positioned accordingly, or your entities may be misaligned in-game. 8. Max count limits the number of entities that can be placed either per layer, per level, the default, or in the world, as well as how to handle what happens when you place more than the allowed limit. You can either discard older entities, prevent adding more, or move the last one instead of adding a new one. Custom fields allow you to associate extra data with this entity. You can either add a single value or an array of values. I won't go over each in detail here, but I'll demo a few in a later video. Different data types include integer, float, boolean, string, multi-line string, color, enum, file path, tile, entity reference, point. Here are a few quick ideas on how to use custom fields. Enemy spawning. If you create an enemy spawner, you could use an enum to choose a specific enemy. Then, in your game, you read the data from this field and decide which enemy to spawn based on that enum value. Point. If you create a teleporter, you could provide an XY coordinate where the teleporter should bring your character. Moving platforms. A boolean could be used to start or stop a moving platform by default.